How's it going, family and friends? I'm here on the Feeling Faith podcast, where we encourage, inspire, and motivate people to share their testimonies for Christ. I'm here with Denise Delatore. She has a phenomenal story. I'm so excited to hear it. How you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm fantastic. Thank you for making the drive out here.
Thank you so much for having me. I really
Yeah,
appreciate it.
yeah. So you have a phenomenal testimony. I've only heard a little bit of it. I
hmm
know there's a whole bigger piece and art to it. But let's start at the beginning. Tell me a little bit about your upbringing. What was your life like in your beginning early stages of development? And did you have any influence of Christ early on in your life? Let's start from square one.
All right. I was raised in a really small town in upstate New York, and I was raised Catholic. Of course, I went to church, but as a young person back then, especially, I'm 63. So they read directly from the Bible, and it wasn't relatable to me as a young person. And so I was raised with Christ and belief in God, but I didn't really practice my religion. And my childhood was pretty traumatic. My dad died when I was 7, and it was a car train accident. So it was horrific. I remember him leaving to go to work that morning. And I was standing at the window as a little girl. And I said goodbye to him, but I didn't kiss him goodbye that day. And he never came back. And from that point forward, my life, it was devastating for me. I was raised by my mom. She was a single parent. And we had a tumultuous relationship. And I left home at a young age and never looked back. And had God been in my life and my father, my biological father, been there for me, I'm sure my life would have been a lot easier. But I was a rebel, and I got myself in bad situations, let's put it that way, with people who weren't looking out for my best interest. So it was hard.
The father figure, as we all know, is a very important piece in every family dynamic. And so the lack of having your father there and his presence had led you to a little bit of lack of discipline, I'm
All
sure,
right.
and allowed you to go a little more on the disobedient side of the spectrum. And
Several dysfunctional relationships with men,
mm,
because I didn't have my father there. My first husband, my love of my life, I fell in love with him in my early 20s, and he ended up dying.
wow.
He became addicted to drugs,
Mm,
and I lost him, and
mm,
that was a devastating. And then I met my son's dad, and I always say he was the best of the worst. Forgive me, Henry, if you're listening. But he was a really good guy. When my son was born, I determined to be the mother that I never had. And
mm,
I was going to be the best parent that I could and nurture that young man. And we had a dysfunctional marriage, and I ended up leaving him when my son was only 5. Again, it was a struggle. I struggled through my whole life with no guidance and no family there to support me.
During that time, you weren't aware of the lack of guidance, the lack of support, and the influence that having a father and those relationships that really help build character and build us and create us into who we are. So, how did your upbringing lead you into a place where you found Christ and found like a real relationship with God? Tell me a little bit about your story and what was it? What was that critical moment where you were
Well,
like, God, I need you?
God was always there. He was always knocking at the door. He was always trying to get my attention, but I wasn't paying attention, right? God gave us free will. And so I remember one time, one of the women that I knew from church, she said to me, "You have to surrender." And I said, "I can't surrender. That's a sign of weakness, right?" I didn't understand what surrendering to God really meant. So I think one of the pivotal points in my life was when I gave birth to my son. I didn't expect to have a child. We had a child right after we got married. And when I held that baby in my arms, it was just so much love, like a miracle. It was a miracle. And I remember crying and the nurse coming in and going, "Oh no, why the tears?" And I'm like, "He's so beautiful." And she goes, "Oh, good." Because many women have post traumatic stress syndrome and things like that, but they don't come out so great looking, honestly. They come out funny looking, but he was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen.
Mm,
And from that day forward, I had purpose. I had a reason to take care of myself because I had to be the best mother to that little boy.
right.
And so that was a pivotal point in my life. And then at the age of 3, he told me about living here before and having to go back to heaven. And I asked him about that because I didn't want to deter him because I knew he was special. He was born with this big cleft in his chin right here. He had a big dimple. And when he was born, the nurse said, "Oh, look, he's been touched by an angel." And I believe that he was sent by God. He was sent to me as a gift from heaven.
Amen.
But he talked about living here before and having to go back to heaven. And I said, "What happened to you?" And he said, "Mommy, the two little tubes that go down to your tummy." And I said, "Yeah." And he goes, "Something was wrong with one of those. And I had to go back." And I said, "Did you go back to heaven?" And he said, "Yes." And I said, "Did you see my dad there?" Because his grandpa would be there, I'm sure. And he said, "Yes, Mommy, I saw Grandpa there." And I said, "Did he say something?" Because now I'm really curious. If you were there, I want to know. Give me more information. And he says, "Yeah," he said, "Someday you will be my son." And I said, "Oh, really? Okay." And I go, "Well, what did Grandpa look like?" And he said, "Mommy, he was beautiful like a woman." So I don't know how a 3-year-old would know anatomy, first of all, right? Because his life was like Teletubbies, basically, right? Watching cartoons. Yeah. And I don't know how he would equate a man to be beautiful like a woman, other than that everything in heaven must be just beautiful. And I remember calling his dad. We were still together at the time and saying, "Hey, Ricky told me the story about being in heaven." And he said, "Denise, he's an old soul." He said he always knew he was an old soul. So that was a pivotal point in my life because I believed him. He couldn't have made that up.
Like, where'd you get that from? Yeah, that's
Right.
amazing.
And then I divorced his dad when he was only 5. We had a dysfunctional, like I said, he was the best of the worst that
Yeah.
I'd been with in my life. And I put my son before him and before my need to be in a relationship with a man. And I devoted, like I said, my heart and soul into raising a well-adjusted young kid. And I wasn't about to raise him in a dysfunctional home and have him damaged by our dysfunction. When he was 5 years old, I ended up divorcing his dad. And that was back in 07 and 08 when the mortgage crisis happened.
Yeah, the whole economy started taking a shift. The market was whoop.
Took a crash.
Yeah.
And I was in mortgages. I was doing loans at the time. And so I was out of a job.
Yeah.
For about 6 months. And that was devastating. I didn't have any money. I couldn't get a job. They weren't hiring loan officers, right?
Nope, there was no jobs for you guys.
And I remember having this very vivid dream of my father, who died when I was 7, came to me in a dream. And I was looking at him as clearly as I'm looking at you. And I recognized the color of his eyes, the wrinkles in his skin. And I felt this overwhelming feeling of love. And I remember crying. And he spoke to me and he said, "Why are you crying?" And I said, "Because I love you so much." And he said, "Denise, everything's going to be okay."
Wow.
And I woke up crying and still feeling that feeling of immense, intense love. And looking back at it now, I realize that wasn't my father. That was Jesus coming to me in the image of my father, telling me at the lowest point in my life that everything is going to be okay.
Wow.
Did I still turn to God at that time? Was everything okay? Did I get through it? Yes. Did I turn to God even after that experience? No, I didn't.
That wasn't the moment.
That wasn't the moment. Nope, that wasn't the moment.
All right. So you had that dream. You felt the presence of the Lord. You felt the love of Christ, the peace of Christ, and still continued down the same path and
Destruction.
just a path of destruction and distraction, because that's what the enemy is good at. He's good at distracting us. So tell me, at what point in that path and in that journey did you really come to find Christ?
This is going to be the hard part to talk about because it's very emotional for me. But when I was 56 years old in 2015, I got diagnosed with cancer.
And what kind of cancer?
It was non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. And they call that the silent killer because by the time you have symptoms, typically the cancer is pretty well advanced. When I got diagnosed, I had 32 tumors, and they were through my whole entire body. So when I got the diagnosis, they said, well, you're going to go through chemotherapy. You've got the good kind of cancer. I didn't know there was a good kind, right? Cancer's cancer, right? But what are you talking about? Right. What do you mean the good kind? And they said there's a 60% cure rate with chemotherapy. And I said, no, I'd rather die than go through chemotherapy. So I'm the rebel, right? That I am. I went to a holistic treatment center in San Diego, and they did mind, body, and soul healing. And I believe that healing is multifaceted, right? It's not just medicine, it is mind, body, and soul, right? So I tried to address some of my inner demons, and I couldn't even stay the 2 weeks there. The cancer flared up and it got really painful, and I realized I had no choice but to go through chemotherapy. So I left after 3 days and drove home, and I lived in a little tiny house in Laguna Canyon at the time. And I was all by myself, estranged from my family, no husband, just my young son, who was 21 at the time. And I remember really feeling horrible that I really let God down because I wasn't going to try to survive. And I realized at that time that it wasn't up to me whether I lived or died. It was up to God gave me life. And when my days were numbered and my time is up, he's going to take me home. So I got down on my hands and knees on the ground and I screamed out his name. And I said, Jesus, please save me. I said, I am so sorry that I didn't want to live because it's not up to me. And please don't take me away from my son. That boy needs me in his life. And I feared leaving my son more than the chemotherapy. So that's when I decided to fight.
Love it.
Yeah.
Love it. Obviously, that was probably the most pivotal moment in your life and in the experiences, even going through the hardships with losing a father and divorces and those are all hard things. Those can all be traumatic experiences.
Mm-hmm.
But it took literally a death sentence. It took a death sentence for you to really call it, get on your knees, right?
And
And cry out
surrender.
and surrender
Surrender.
and just give it to God. This is your life, God.
Mm-hmm.
You gave me life. I love that. That's amazing. So tell me a little bit about like that experience. How I could only imagine how you were feeling. Like how did you overcome those
Mm-hmm.
emotions and what obviously your son was a pivotal piece and component
Mm-hmm.
of the fight
Mm-hmm.
and your willpower to continue to live. But like how were you feeling during that time? Like when you got the diagnosis and you were working through all of this in terms.
I will have to say it was devastating. It was the most devastating thing I'd ever gone through, and I was petrified, right? But I call them my God stories. Every day I would pray. Every day I would wake and thank Jesus that I was alive. If I had a question, somebody would come into my life with the answer, complete strangers. We lived across from the park, and I had a puppy at the time, and I would walk my dog in the park. And I remember one day I was worried about the radiation therapy. I thought, oh, radiation is going to kill me. And a radiologist, I ended up meeting her, and she ended up talking to me. And whatever question I had, God brought somebody in my life with an answer for me. And I went through chemotherapy. I was supposed to go through 4 rounds, and the cancer was going to be gone. And by the way, I never got sick. Did lose all my hair and my eyelashes and my eyebrows, but I never once was sick. And I've talked to people who couldn't lift their head off a pillow during chemo, but I was never sick, which was a miracle, a miracle. And after the 4 rounds of chemo, they said, okay, you should be clear. I wasn't clear. I had a partial remission. Then I went through 2 96-hour infusions of chemotherapy, straight infusions, hooked up to that machine for a week straight. And I was hospitalized both times, never got sick, walked out of the hospital and went to work the next day. And then I went in to get the PET scan thinking, oh, for sure now, right? God has cured me, right? I know now after 2 96-hours infusions that it's gone. And so I walked into the exam room and met the doctor, and she couldn't look me in the eye. And I knew when she couldn't look me in the eye that it was bad news. So I said to her, I can tell by the look in your eye, it's not very good news. And she just shook her head no. And I said, what are you saying? I have a 21-year-old son at home. And she said, you have 6 months to live, make plans. And so I was alone there. And you would think, yeah, you would have thought I would have crumpled up on the ground in a ball and cried, but I didn't. I got angry. And I looked at her and I pointed at her like this. And I said, I have a question for you. Do you believe in God? And she looked at the ground. And I said, no, I demand you answer me. While I'm in this room and I'm your patient, I want to know, do you believe in God? And she said, no. And I said, why? She said, because I'm a medical doctor. I said, oh, okay, I'm going to tell you something. I believe in God. Where there's God, there's hope. And I'm going to keep fighting this disease until there's no more hope. And then I got my all of my records and I walked out and never went back to her.
Wow. That is phenomenal. And good for you for sharing that and having that willpower and that strength and in that time of no hope. And for somebody to give you that type of information, like that's gotta be devastating. Like to tell you have 6 months, figure out your life and go live it, like, because that's all the time you got. Um, I think that's so amazing, and it's a little sad because there's so many, probably a lot of our viewers right now are out there that have had similar experiences, and then when you hear those words from somebody and you accept that as truth, like, that's gonna kill you alone if you accept that, right?
Absolutely.
You're just gonna give up, throw it in the towel and wave your white flag and say, "I'm done."
I had a 0.001% chance of survival. So I'm pretty sure 99.9% of the people out there who got sent home to die are not sitting here talking to you today. And that's why it's so important for me to let people know that if you surrender to God and you have the faith and the wherewithal, He will give you the wisdom on what to do.
Amen. That's so true. So after that experience, you walked out, you said, "Okay, this fight is not over. This is not over. I will continue to fight till the end." And then what happened?
The next miracle happened, right? It was miracle after miracle. So the next God story is that I was in real estate at the time. When I was going through the chemotherapy, I happened to be talking to a client and I was too sick to show the property. And so I said, Ed, I'm really sorry I went through chemo today and I just don't feel up to showing the property. Do you mind if I just sit in the car and let the other agent look at the home? And he said, sure. And so he knew what was going on. And he said, I have this article I want to share with you. But okay. So it was an article, and I'll never forget the dates. I was diagnosed in June of 2015, close to the 14th, which was my birthday. I was sent home to die in December of 2015. But in October 18th of 2015, he gave me an article that was in the LA Times about a clinical trial that was being held at UCLA. And it was called CAR T cell therapy. It was the first of its kind immune therapy where they actually genetically engineer your cells to kill the cancer. And so when he gave me that article in October, I said, I'm going to hold on to this just in case I need it. But the chemo's going to work because they told me you have a good kind of cancer. Chemo's going to work. So then the chemo failed. So I pull out the article and then I called the National Cancer Institute of Technology and I said, okay, I need to get in this clinical trial. And I said, what hospital in California has it? And there was only two, 25 across the nation and two in California. So I called the first one and they had the slot filled. They call it a slot position, right? And then the next one was UCLA. So I called UCLA and I said, I need to talk to whoever's in charge of clinical trial. It took me 4 tries. They kept putting me on hold and then another person would get on the phone and then they put me on hold. And I said, listen, I just need to talk. I don't have time I only have 6 months to live. I need to talk to somebody who knows about this trial, please. And so then the next person that got on the phone was Dr. Timmerman at UCLA. And he was running the clinical trial. And I said, hi, Dr. Timmerman. I'm Denise Delatore, and I'm the perfect patient for your CAR T cell clinical trial. And he actually laughed at me, right? Because that's not how you get in a clinical trial, right? The patients don't do their research and then call you. So anyways, they were enrolling January 18th, failed the chemotherapy end of December, enrolling in this miraculous clinical trial January 18th. And I got in. And I had to qualify to get in too. So I had to have the perfect blood work and everything had to be perfect, right? So the timing had to be perfect. I had to live in Southern California. UCLA had to have the trial. It had to come about right when the chemotherapy failed. And then that doctor had to answer the phone, right? I had to have the tenacity to not take no for an answer and get through to that man. So I was the first patient in the clinical trial. And that was in April, I think I went through the clinical trial of 2016. And 8 years later, here I
Here
am.
you are,
Here I
a
am.
walking miracle.
It is it's a
Wow.
miracle.
Some divine appointments, right?
Yeah,
Like we discussed
right?
before. Divine timing
Mm-hmm.
and just all God's timing at the end
It
of the
was in
day.
God's timing, right?
Yeah,
And
that's
I
amazing.
always wanted to tell my story from a spiritual aspect. I've done a lot of interviews about the medical technology, but I know that if it wasn't for God, I wouldn't be here. First of all, He gave me the will to live. He brought me a miracle child into my life, and He kept giving me signs all along the way. I just wasn't listening. And so my son said to me, Mom, are you mad at God for giving you cancer? And I said, no, honey, because cancer was the best thing that ever happened to me. It changed my entire life.
Yeah.
Yeah. The best thing that ever happened. I never thought I would say those words, but
Mm,
I was slowly killing myself. And I'm not the same person that I was before I got cancer.
that's incredible. Renewed hope, renewed faith, renewed relationships, I'm sure. I could only imagine your perspective now. And tell me a little bit. You've got to have more appreciation for the times you do have with your boy and with your friends and the rest of your family. It's got to just be such a different lens you're looking through, right?
Yes. The veil has been lifted and my eyes have been opened to the Lord, our God.
Mm,
Every morning when I get up, I look at the sky and I say, thank you, Jesus. That's
mhm.
the first thing that I do. And if I
Amen.
don't say it first thing in the morning, I say it later in the day and say, oops, sorry, I didn't tell you. I read a passage every morning now.
Mhm.
I have 2 dogs that I walk every morning, and there's a yellow rose bush on my path to the park, and I always stop and smell the flowers.
Love it.
The sky looks a little bluer to me now. The ocean is a little bit bluer. I look at the fresh grass growing. We get so caught up in all of the things going on in the world that we don't look at all the little tiny things that are the miracles, like the beauty that God has provided to us on this earth. And I know now that when my time does come that I am going to go to spend eternity in heaven with the Lord. And I already know how beautiful heaven is going to be because I've felt that immense love. It's hard for me to talk about and put into words because that feeling of God's love is so powerful and so immense. So it's just my eyes have been opened to the
Yeah.
beauty of God's love.
Yeah. And it all came through relationship, right? And what I love about your story is it wasn't somebody coming smacking you around with a Bible telling you, "Hey, you got to do this, you got to go to church, you got to follow these commandments," or anything like that. It was through your personal experience, your personal testimony, and what God had allowed you to go through, right? Because God allowed it for the building of your character and truly of your faith, which is the essence of life when you look at it. Like that's why we're here is to build in our faith, share our personal testimonies, and to be a person who encourages and inspires and motivates other people to grow closer in their relationship with God, our creator. And so I love that. So tell me now, what, speaking of purpose, what is your new purpose?
Well, while you were talking, I was thinking about it and I just want to just say it like out loud,
Yeah.
that I think God, not only did he give me renewed hope, right? And faith and inspiration. What I want to do is offer that to other people now. I have this burning desire very down deep inside to offer hope and inspiration to other people. I'm starting a little website. It's going to be called California Cancer Connection. I'm looking for funding now and I'm figuring a way to get that up and running. But I want to offer a resource to cancer patients because it is such a devastating thing to hear the word cancer. You all think you think you're going to die. Whether they tell you are or not, a good percentage of people don't make it, right? And especially a lot of children too. But there's a lot of resources out there. I happen to be very resourceful and I'd like to be able to help other people. That's my goal now. I am a realtor and I probably always will be a realtor, but my hope and dream is to be able to inspire and give other people hope when they feel that there is none. If I can do it, they can do it. If I can do it, you can do it. And healing is multifaceted. It is a mind, body, soul experience. I would absolutely not have had the will to survive if God hadn't been present in my life through even the turmoil that I went through, the loss of my father, the end of my marriage, but the birth of my son and him talking about being in heaven. Those are things that you just can't make up. Those are undeniable signs from the Lord.
Yeah, it's true. It's very true. And that's why we started this podcast is so that we can hear amazing stories and testimonies like this and get the perspectives that people don't really hear too often. And I truly feel that's what we're called to do is to share our personal testimonies. We're not here to go like preach at people and tell them why they have to do this or why they have to do that. I think we're here to share our stories and what God has truly done in our lives and how he's transformed our hearts. And your story is just very touching, amazing. So many God things happen in your
My
life
God
that are
stories.
just
I had miracle
yeah.
after miracle. And I think God, sometimes we need to quiet our mind. That's what I've
Mhm.
learned. We need to quiet our minds because we're so busy, right? And you can't hear God speak to you when you're constantly your mind is going, right? You need to just quiet your mind. And because sometimes he speaks in a whisper. I didn't listen to the whisper. He had to give me a death sentence for me to listen to him. But I would prefer for people to try to learn from my mistakes, right? And my horrific experience and not have to go to that point to turn to God. My life would have been entirely different if I had known him sooner. I know that for a fact.
Your path was not something that you planned, but God knew what was happening and he brought you home, right? And he's going to bring you home one day and in his timing. And the doctor doesn't get to say when that clock
That's
is
right.
ticked and over.
That's
Like
absolutely right. And I can't tell you how many people I've talked to who have lost all hope because of their doctor. As a matter of fact, 3 years after they sent me home to die, that hospital called me to check up on me. And I asked to speak to the medical director, and I said, she had no right telling me that. And he said, what was the message that you want to get through to me, Denise? And I said, that woman had no right taking away my hope. Just because she didn't believe in God doesn't mean that I don't believe in God. And where there's God, there's hope. Hope is the anchor of the soul. So and they say, were you angry with her? People say you should call and tell her. I said, no, I pray for her because she doesn't believe in God and she's going to have a tragedy in her life. We all do. And who is she going to turn to? So I do pray for her. I have no animosity or hatred in my heart for anyone because that's of the devil.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
That's right. I love that you said healing is mind, body, and soul. And that is so true.
Mm-hmm.
And it all begins in the mind.
That's right.
And that's where the enemy wants to attack
That's
us.
right.
That's his little tools and his little tactics.
The
Get in the
devil is the
mind.
great deceiver.
That's right. Get in the mind, and then I can control all. Lead
That's
with
right.
fear, I can control. And that's not of God. Fear is not of God. And another thing that you mentioned too was quieting our mind.
Mm-hmm.
The Lord says to be still and know that I am God.
Mm-hmm.
And that is so important. I've experienced in my own personal life and personal testimonies that when you're still and you quiet your mind and you go just spend time with God, getting out in nature is the best thing you can do. Get away from the distractions, away from the computer, your phone, turn it off, get away from all of it. Go spend some time with God and he'll speak to you. He will
It's
open
true.
up his word and he'll speak to you.
It's absolutely true.
Build
There's
that
so much
relationship.
bad going on in the world today, but I feel that there's a lot of hope and a lot of good too. And I think
Yes.
what's happening right now is a lot of people are becoming more aware of God.
Mm,
And that's what we need right now. We need stories of hope. We need
yes.
stories of perseverance. Faith is something you have to practice every day. That's one thing that I've learned. It takes practice. And it's okay if you mess up. It's okay if you make a mistake. It's okay if you fall into that old pattern of behavior and thinking, because we're all human, right?
Yeah, that's right.
But you have to practice and believe and know. And the knowing is what gives you the strength to endure. The
Yes.
knowing that God is there and he's not going to let you fall.
That's right. The Bible says faith is the substance of things hoped for and evidence of things not seen.
That's right.
Faith is the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen. And you have a lot of experience of the unseen, and that faith has given you the hope, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's just super amazing. So what is your biggest encouragement as we get ready to wrap this up? What's your biggest encouragement to somebody who's going through cancer? Maybe they just got a diagnosis. Maybe they've been living with cancer for years. What is your biggest encouragement to them?
I think that the thing that I struggled with, I think the most is like we worry about the unknown. You need to hand your cares to God. And I am grateful for every single day, every moment. I think God wants us to be grateful and just acknowledging him on a daily basis. And I do read a passage of the Bible every morning. And I just start my day out thanking Jesus. He will give you the strength. If you ask and just whisper his name. I cried out pretty loud, Jesus, pretty darn loud. But if you just whisper his name and have the faith of a mustard seed, that's all you need to endure. God will take care of you. He placed his hand on me. There is no doubt in my mind that God has his hand on me. And when you know that and you're walking hand in hand with God, you can endure anything.
You went to school to be a model, I believe. Is that right?
Okay, yes, I did. I was a rebel and I left home when I was 18 and I grew up in a little country podunk town and I went straight to Miami to fashion college, right, to become a model. I never made it. I was never a Christy Brinkley. I think Christy Brinkley was the model of that era. But when I turned 61, I made the cover of Cancer Health magazine.
Amazing.
And I said, God must have a good sense of humor because I never thought I'd be on the cover of a magazine at 61 years of age. So he does have a good sense of humor as well.
That is awesome. That's amazing. And you're right. He does have a sense of humor. He created humor. It is fascinating to see how he can breathe things full
That was a
circle like
miracle. Let
that.
me tell you, being on the
Yeah.
cover of a magazine at 61 was a miracle. And that also gave hope and inspiration because it was distributed across the whole United States. So it
Yeah.
was in waiting rooms where people could read my story.
Amazing. That's amazing. And your story is still going strong. It's going to go even stronger. And I'm confident that the more you continue to press into your purpose, your
Hmm.
newfound goals, and your vision for this new company and website, and really building and bridging those gaps in relationships for other cancer patients and helping them find hope through Christ is only going to glorify and magnify God more, but it's also going to push you to a next level in your faith. And
Well,
so,
thank you so much
yeah,
for having me and listening to my story. It was all in God's timing, right? It took
100%.
8 years for me to tell my story. And by the way, I had one tiny little tumor that kind of never went away. And in September of this last year, I got the all clear. So I'd been
Praise
really,
God.
really still fighting the disease. And so the other thing is to be patient. I learned to be
Mhm.
patient. It
Yes.
took 8 years, but I never gave up the hope and faith in God that there would eventually be an all clear. You only need one person in your life, and that's God.
You only need one person in your life, and that's God. We put our faith and trust in people, and they're going to let us down
That's
10 times
right.
out of 10. We're sinful. That's just our nature. It's okay, right? Because Jesus Christ died on the cross for our sins, and he's here to restore us and have a relationship with us and really bridge that gap of our brokenness and fill that void in our
Hmm.
hearts. And so you're right, 100%. We just need one person, and that's God. Awesome. Thank you so
Thank
much
you.
for being on the podcast. Where can people find you?
If you just Google my name, Denise Delatore, you can find me.
Any social media channels, Facebook,
I'm starting a
Instagram?
YouTube channel, but I haven't gotten there quite yet. I'm just trying to wait for God to give me the answers on the next thing to do because now that I've surrendered to him, I don't always know what's best or what's next. So I'm just waiting for him to open the next door for me.
Patience is a virtue.
Yep.
Yeah,
I
I
learned
love
that.
it.
I learned to be patient. I never used to be very patient. Most people in California are not very patient people,
Yeah.
right? But I have
That's true.
learn to be patient and trust. Yeah. So I'm not quite sure what's next. We'll see.
All right. I love it. I'm excited to continue to follow your journey
Thank
and
you.
continue to see how God uses you for his
And
kingdom.
I wish you all the best too. And if I can come back, maybe I'll have even more miracles to talk about at a
Yes.
later date.
We will definitely have you back on
Okay.
at some point. So we'd love that. Thank you guys for tuning in. The Fueling Faith podcast, where we encourage, inspire, and motivate people to grow closer in their relationship with God and share their personal testimonies. Make sure to follow us, subscribe, and tune into the next one. We'll see you there.